That one was pretty close. It's nice to hear that sound, folks. When you do, you know it's time for another episode of the Rec Poker Podcast Forums Edition. I'm your host, Jim Reed, Bluffsterini in the home games, and at Hold'em_Steelers on Twitter. I'd like to thank Learn Pro Poker, Website AMP, and the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino for their support this year. And I'd like to thank Taylor Moss, John Somsky, Rob Washam, and Chris Jones for joining me tonight so we can talk a little poker. Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and where we can meet you?
Yeah, I'm Chris Jones. I'm 5x5 on PokerStars and Twitter.
And
I'm
John?
Taylor. I was going to jump in there. I'm Taylor Moss. You can find me in the Rec Poker home game as Gopherboy TJM or on Twitter as @Taylor_Moss.
I'm John Somsky. I'm Poker Geek MN everywhere, and I'm a little bit late sometimes.
I'm Rob Washam, and I'm Bradman50 everywhere.
And it's not John's fault. Just like every week, we are playing in the Rec Poker home game tonight, so we are trying to take each other's chips. And poor John is also playing in the Papes tournament because it's one of the days of the month where there's a 6 in it. So his attention is very divided. Everyone's out there to get a pin tonight. So the other thing we do every week is we take one post from the Rec Poker forums and we talk about it here on the show. So this week we're going to take a look at a post by Jamin96, who I happen to know is a pretty cool dude named Ben who lives on the East Coast. And it's been fun getting to know you, Ben. So thanks for putting a post here in the forums. So Ben says it was his first time playing in the home game last night in probably a month, and one hand really sticks out from the rest. And I'll just go through the pre-flop action, and then we can talk a bit about what makes this hand interesting. So it's in a very early level, 25-50 with an ante of 6, and everybody has between 50 and 85 big blinds. So there's an open from under the gun to 2.4 big blinds to 120 chips, and it folds to us in the low jack with queen of diamonds, queen of clubs. So queen, jack offsuit. Ben makes the fold, and it gets around to the big blind who also calls. So we get to the flop with 8.8 big blinds. And before we get into with the flop, because there's some interesting stuff there, does anybody want to talk about the pre-flop action at this point? Just for me personally, queen jack suited is one of those hands that is worth having a conversation about in this kind of situation.
Well, actually, it was queen jack offsuit, right?
Oh, sorry. Is that what I said? Yeah, that's what I meant to say. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, queen of diamonds, jack of clubs. Good call.
Yeah, we do things very professionally around here. The first time you read it as queen queen. Then you read it as queen jack, and then you read it as queen jack suited. So yeah, we're on top of things, aren't we?
Yeah, it's just shaking some of the rust off. We are recreational podcast panelists as well, folks.
Are you a big hand or what?
But yeah, thank you. Queen of diamonds, jack of clubs. Thanks, guys.
Boom, nailed it.
Nailed it. Third time's the charm. You should see me with my audio cues, man. I am killing it tonight. So what do you think, guys? Queen jack offsuit, under the gun, open.
I typically am folding this right away.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, it's just
me too.
For me, it's a fold. It's not in my range for calling, or calling is probably the worst thing you could do. Mm-hmm. Folding is probably the second best thing you could do, or the best thing you could do, and the second best thing to do would be to 3-bet it. As a bluff, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm always tricky. I'm always wondering when that original raise is from under the gun. It always sort of makes me hesitant to make these kind of 3-bets with these offsuit Broadway cards, because I mean, their range isn't that wide to begin with, and you're kind of blocking a lot of the hands that you'd prefer they have when they open there and you want them to fold. So I am leaning towards fold. You are in late position. It's nice to play flops in position, but I feel like you can do it with a stronger hand, with a hand that's going to play better than queen jack offsuit.
Yeah, for me, what really resonates with the fold is the stack sizes that we have. So we start with 3,000 chips, and we're at the 25-50 level. So everyone's got 60 big blinds, most likely. It looks like they gave some stack sizes, which is we have a 52 big blind stack, an 81 big blind stack, and a 65 big blind stack. Like, those are the situations where we don't really want to be playing an offsuit hand like Queen Jack, because we don't want to play for 50, 60 big blinds with potentially a top pair type of hand, and one that's going to be up against a range that has a lot of our top pairs beat. It'd be more inclined to play this if we're shorter stacked, and it becomes, more so of the, top pair is going to win. And if we lose a 15 big blind stack, it's not that crushing. But once we get above like 20, 25 big blinds, then this just becomes a fold for sure. And even on those shorter stacks where I'm saying it's slightly more lucrative, probably still is a fold there too.
Yeah, and the other thing I don't like about flatting here is just our position too. We've got we're in the cutoff, right? So we're in the low jack, so we got a ton of players to act behind us as well, and so we're reacting to it under the gun open. We've got a ton of people behind us. We're going to get squeezed so much with a hand we cannot continue with. It just really feels like a hand we need to get rid of.
And I noticed that what we said earlier, Jammin96, our correspondent here, says that it was the first time playing in the home game in probably a month or so. And I think when you don't play often, you do get tempted to make these calls where it's just like, let's just see a flop. I haven't played. I want to play some poker. Queen Jack offsuit looks like a hand that's got decent equity. And it kind of depends on like what are you there for? What are you there for? Are you there to have fun and gamble, or are you there to have fun and play sound strategic winning poker? You can have elements of both of that in your game, but I know when I haven't played in a while, I loosen up for sure. And I get a little passive, and I want to play a little bingo poker, because that's fun. But we are talking about sound poker strategy here, and I think in a vacuum, the panel says it's probably a fold there. Now, every once in a while, you get some fun situations post-flop. So here's what ends up happening. So there's almost 9 big blinds in the pot when the big blind calls as well. And the flop comes 9 of clubs, jack of diamonds, 10 of clubs. So we've got top pair and an open-ended straight draw with 1 over. I think we've got a backdoor. Do you have a club in his hand? Do we have a backdoor flush? Yep. So there's a lot of potential here. And the action's kind of interesting. So the big blind player into the 9 big blind pot leads the minimum for 1 big blind, which is interesting. I always think that minimum bet is usually not in a balanced range. So it should tell you something about that player and their holdings. And then the original player, the original raiser from under the gun, raises to 5.4 big blinds. So it puts 4.5 on top, which is adding about half the previous pot to it, which is not that big a raise either. So what does that tell you guys about their holdings here? So again, the flop is 9 of clubs, jack of diamonds, 10 of clubs, 3-handed. We get a donk for 1 big blind and a raise from under the gun. And now it's our action. What are people thinking?
I mean, multi-way, this is tough, right? Like we're in a hand with 3 people, and the other 2 people that have acted before us have shown some sort of inclination to liking this hand. And we also like our hand. I mean, having top pair with a straight draw is pretty darn good, but the best you could hope for in this situation outside of actually like flopping a straight or something like that. So we should feel good about it, but now we're stuck into like a weird spot. Do we call and try and, see a turn card? Do we raise again because we like our hand that much? I think folding is out of the question when we flop like this. If we're going to fold on this flop, we for sure should be playing the hand to begin with. I think a call is all right here. And this is what makes it so tough with like these or the stacked ups that we have. If we're shorter stacked, I think it's just an easy just jam it in. But the fact that it's 5 big blinds in there, we probably have another 50 or so behind. There's some limiting things to do there, because if we do get it all in, we're almost likely behind, almost for sure behind. And yeah, I roundabout way of me saying like I think a call is all right here, but there are raising options that I think aren't that bad either.
Yeah, and I tend to pretty much discount a lot I mean that one big blind lead can be real strength, but I, I tend to not take that into my decision making too much, and kind of consider that the bet we're getting here to 5.5 big blinds is just a factor of having that initial raise. So I don't mind flatting this. It's not like somebody has had like a standard open and then like a 3 bet of like a standard bet where we're really still dealing almost with like I just discount that initial one so much that it's not something that I'm super scared of. But we're in a dicey situation here. Regardless, we've flopped well, but this is a board that is gonna hit a lot of ranges. It's gonna connect with um, a lot of people who've come along with this. So it's one where we've also got to be careful with. So I think I do prefer the flat, but it's also why I think this is a tough situation to put yourself in the first place, um, because even when you flop this well, you're really struggling to figure out what to do at this stack depth.
Yeah,
But
this
I
is
but
no good.
but with this in this exact spot, if I had made this initial call pre-flop, I'm flatting here.
Yeah, I think it's hard. It's hard to think about, this is this is an above average flop for your hand. So I think, if this had been like a huge bet and then a shove or something like that, then that would be more of a decision about whether to continue. But I think, and as you say, Chris, and Taylor made a good point earlier too about the sizing. Um, the fact that you're only facing 5.4 big blinds, like that's only a slightly above half pot bet anyway. Even if I mean, you can like you can call even expecting to hit your straight outs, almost by the time you get to the river. And Binkley makes a point here in the forum, and I should say, folks, we skim through the forum posts here when we talk about this stuff because we don't want to talk on here for an hour about one hand. I know some of that would be fun, but that's what you go to the wrecking crew for. Um, and Binkley makes a good point in here that you really should think about that donk as a check almost. And I think this is a great way to think about those little min bets, especially when they're out of position, is just treat them like a check. So Binkley is right on the money here. When they make that one big blind donk and then the under the gun player raises, I would just treat it as though you're facing a bet for 5.4 big blinds into a 9 big blind pot, and I think it's a call too with our holding for sure. And you don't love that you get to reopen the action, but that's a pretty weak line, that donk. So I think it's a call for sure.
Do
Anybody
you
else?
treat it as exactly as a check though? Because like it's such a connected board, 9-10 Jack,
Hmm.
and they're putting at least some sort of bet out there. Like if they have nothing, don't you just check, give up? When they lead out for at least one big blind, I give it at least some sort of credibility that it's not the bottomest part of their range. Like if you have pocket fives here, you're not leading out for a big blind. Like there's almost no chance that you're doing it. But it check is what the line you're going to take. So I think you can actually like strengthen their range slightly by just getting rid of like a lot of their bogus hands.
So do you think?
So in generality, I like to think of it as a check when we're talking about just, the grand scheme of things. But the way this is played out, multi-way with disconnected of a board, I just I think there's at least some credibility to them leading out for a single big blind.
I think that's a great point about chopping off the bottom of their range there. I think that's right because I mean, you could include, if you wanted to include some like draw hands with no showdown equity that they chose not to check there. Like, I think that is more likely than a pair of pocket fives. I mean, I know Taylor, you don't play that 5-5 garbage anyway, but some players might disagree. Uh, so what should we talk a little bit about what do we think is the subset of hands that they might lead one big blind with there? Just academically, because it's a really weird move, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, and to just take like a rough stab at it, it feels like it's, some sort of either an 8 or a queen, some sort of pair, some sort of club draw, maybe even like a king would do this. But it, like, you can just weed out a lot of the other like stuff that's in there. Like, do they do this with 5-6 suited? No. Do they do this with pocket 2s through pocket 6s? No. Stuff like that. So like, you can't like scrape out a whole bunch, but you can take out a decent chunk of like what their range might look like.
Do you think they do it with 5-6 of clubs?
Yes. I tried saying clubs right away. So yeah, any club combos that they have, I think they might do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I tend to read this as they've either paired one of these or they've got some sort of a draw. Even something like pocket 7s or pocket 8s would maybe make sense here too. So yeah, they're not doing this with complete garbage, but they're also probably, I don't think they're doing this. I mean, some players would do this with like king queen, but I don't know. I don't know if a lot of people would.
You guys worried about them reopening the action when it comes to your decision here to call or to raise or to fold? Is that a factor here?
Not too worried about that.
From what I've seen, in our home games here, if they were to reopen the action, it would almost never be a bluff this early in the hand. So I think you could just comfortably fold at that point in time.
Yeah, agreed.
So as played, and I think we all agree that's the right play by Jam 96 here. So they do call with the top pair. Now, do we want to talk about raising? Is there an incentive to raise here? I mean, we kind of have, I don't know, that under the gun range I don't think is capped here. So there's no reason to think that they're, is that true? I think that's true. They're showing a lot of strength with that 2-bet on the flop. And they have the top of that straight sometimes, so I don't see why that would be a problem. They have, some over pairs too. I guess it depends on who they are. So you don't want to get into a spot where you've got top pair and you are letting them play perfectly with all their other holdings, right? What do you guys think? Is there an argument for raising there?
I just think the hands that you're trying to get them to fold, if you raise, are like ace king and ace queen exclusively. And I guess when you're trying to get them to fold that, you're trying to deny the potential of equity of hitting either a queen or a king to give them a straight. Because otherwise you're all right playing against those hands. But everything else that they have that has some sort of value probably beats you. It's hard for them to have a hand that doesn't, unless they open under the gun with something like a king 10. And you can get that to call a raise. But then we're stretching on those types of things. If we raise, we're likely only getting called by over pairs and straights and good flush draws that probably have straight equity in them too. So I just think raising is probably just out of the question here. I think just flat calling is the right option.
Yeah, me too. And I think when you raise, what you do is you contort their continuing range to it's just only hands that beat you then. So it's like Taylor says, other players' ranges are impacted by your actions. And you can change the hands that you think they're going to continue through that action by the size of your bet or raise. So by creating a circumstance where they're only continuing with monsters, you're not really helping yourself. It's not really a value raise because you're not actually getting action from any of the hands that you beat. So I think for me speaking, it's a clear call, even with the out of position players still to act.
And I think sometimes also the other thing to add to that is sometimes I think we get into this, oh, I'm going to raise and I'm going to push out, there's like, I'm going to push out their strong flush draws because that's really scary. I don't want a club to come. But I think sometimes we think we can push out more flush draws than we actually can. I mean, if they have a really strong flush draw here, I don't with some maybe some overcards or some straight equity or those kinds of things. I don't know that we're going to be able to push them out no matter what we do as sort of a raise here. So I like a call a lot as well.
And that's something they talk about on the Thinking Poker podcast all the time too. And I know I'm always talking about the Thinking Poker podcast, but Andrew always says, no one's folding any draws here anyway. And it always makes me think like, well, so that has to affect the way you're value betting in these spots then, right? Like if you're playing in these player pools where no one's ever folding any draws, I mean, you got to be real thoughtful about how you're going to bluff on draw heavy boards, but you should also be very thoughtful about how you're playing like sets and stuff here too. If no one's, if you've got the made straight here, because if no one's ever folding those draws, just think about what that means when you're holding those value hands. Maybe you can afford to just get some straight up value and not have to be so tricky about it sometimes. It's never a good time for a bluff and a bet and a value bet at the same time. But usually if it's a bad spot for a bluff, it's a good spot for a value bet. So think about if there's ways you can find the other side of that coin in some spots like this. So as played, it's called, and the big blind calls as well. So we come to the turn. There is 25 big blinds in the middle, and it's the 2 of clubs. So the board is 9 of clubs, Jack of diamonds, 10 of clubs, 2 of clubs, and we have the Queen of diamonds and the Jack of clubs. So we've still got top pair. There's a flush there's 3 to a flush on the board, and we've got the Queen to go along with it. And other than that, not that exciting. The big blind player checks, and the under the gun player bets 15.5 big blinds, which is about 2/3 of the pot. What do we think here? People have shown some interest in this pot, and this player who raised under the gun got called, then 2-bet the flop, is now making a bigger raise than they did, a bigger bet than they did before relative to the pot. You have basically the same hand you had before, but now it's behind the flushes. You've got a redraw to the queen, and you still got your straight outs, but with a flush on board, that's never that exciting. What are people thinking at this point? How excited are you?
Not very.
Yeah.
Well, the flush came in, so I mean, and that's one of the things that you're always looking at. Doesn't seem to be scaring off our opponent.
Mm-hmm.
The guy under the gun is, so he's at the very least he's got a ace or a king of clubs in his hand. He could have pair of aces, pair of kings, one of them being the club, or he could have the ace king of clubs for that matter, which would be devastating. But yeah, it's he's showing a lot of strength, and I don't know that I could continue here. I have a very over-enlarged knit bone, which means that I have to consider folding in this spot.
Yeah, I agree. This when we get 2 people who flat here, you're going multi-way to a turn that has a really obvious flush draw on board, and then that flush hits, and nobody seems very scared about that fact, putting a big bet into 2 players. And this is no longer a hand that I'm very excited about going any further with.
and I will point out the clubs on the board are the 2, the 9, and the 10, and we've got the Jack. So under the gun, they really only have the ace, the king, and the queen available to them. Maybe they're playing some wheel suited aces, but having the 9, the 10, and the jack not in the deck for them does really limit the number of club combos they can have under the gun, I think, because it's really just that ace king, ace queen, king queen. King queen had the straight the whole time, which is consistent with their raise. I mean, that would be a pretty sweet spot to be in, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So from combinatorics, there's 3 flushes that they have: ace king of clubs, ace queen of clubs, king queen of clubs. But there's also 6 combos of aces, 6 combos of kings. Like, it's more likely that they have aces or in this exact spot. Actually, twice as more likely that they have aces than they do flush. So that's worth noting in terms of like, what are we worried about in things. If this was heads up, I'd actually be on board with just calling here. The thing that makes me lean fold is the fact that there's another person in the hand, that big blind, that when they donk lead, a decent part of their range is 2 of those clubs. So we have to at least give that some sort of credit. And if they do have clubs and we call here, we're just toast. Because if we call, we're hoping for a king, an 8, a queen, or a jack, which, there's a decent amount of those out there to kind of catch up versus this under the gun person, because we're most likely behind here. So if it was heads up that under the gun, which we have a pretty good range definition of, I think calling is kind of okay. It might be like break even or maybe even slightly losing money in this spot, but it's probably close enough to at least consider. With that person in the hand, I think it's a fold.
So as played, Jammin 96 does call, and we go to the river, which is the queen of spades. So, and the big blind also calls. So the pot's getting big. No one's scared off. The river's the 9 of clubs. Sorry, the river's the queen of spades. So 9 of clubs, jack of diamonds, 10 of clubs, 2 of clubs, queen of spades. So there's a 3-card flush, a 4-card straight. We've got the top 2 pair, and we are in position. So the blinds player shoves for the remaining 43.8 big blinds into a pot of 56 and is called by the under the gun player with 31 big blinds. And now here we are. We've got top 2 on a very scary board. What are people thinking? I know what I'm thinking.
I wouldn't have played it pre-flop. I would have called on the flop. I would have folded the turn. So at this point in time, I'm out of the hand because any king beats me, right? Mm-hmm. A single king right now beats me.
Yeah, I think Ben did fold on the turn, but just showed what the river action was. But even if we made it to the river here and we have top 2 pair and it goes shove and call, I think we have to lay down 2 pair here.
Good call.
Sure.
We got the card that like, hey, it looks good, but what are they playing that 2 pair beat in this spot? So if we even got this spot, I think it's never tell anyone what I actually had here and just fold.
Right. Yeah, I mean, what do we beat? I mean, like one is if I think that we did get a fold here in the turn, but if we
did,
this
he
river,
said it very clearly. Yep.
If we reach this river, I can believe one person's bluffing, but once you get a call there, now, I mean, what are they calling with? Are they calling with Jack 10 or something? I mean, I just think there's nothing that we're beating here.
Yeah, and Ben does make the point here. He says, my first move on the turn was to hit the button for all in, but then something stopped him and he started thinking about ranging his opponent. And he says, what the heck is player 1 betting this turn with? And I'm even going to win if my flush does get there. And he does some really good, thoughtful thinking about what it is that the opponent might have. And says, so with my time bank ticking away and almost gone, I smashed the fold button. And I think that's right. I think that's a disciplined fold that just shows fold. You're thinking about what these other players have. And, the absolute strength of your hand is important, but particularly multi-way. On wet boards like this, when there's one player calling out of the big blind, ranges are really important. And I think this was a savvy play on the turn. Any other closing thoughts for Ben? I know we like to keep these short and sweet, but this was a great post. There was a lot of good details in here, and I wanted to give everyone a chance to kind of flesh that out.
Yeah, I think this is the kind of thinking that I saw from Ben when I railed him that one night. I think he came in fourth on one of our home games. And I railed him until about 11 o'clock until they're down to 4 players. So this is the kind of things that he was talking about through his thought process as we were going through that. And I was very impressed with the way he did that. So other than his call on a pre-flop, I think he played the hand very well.
Yeah, it feels like it. So Ben, Jammin96, thanks for writing in. And you and everyone else, we started this new feature, the Rec Room, where if you want to connect with any of the members from the Wrecking Crew, I mean, there's 2 ways to do it. Lots of the members of the Wrecking Crew, if you go to the Rec Poker shop, have all sorts of ways to get in touch, whether it's working with them by the hour, doing database reviews, going through video of your play and analyzing it. There's lots of great ways to get better working with someone who can sort of show you some shortcuts and take an objective look at your game. But if that's not your thing, we also have this Rec Room where once a month, any premium member can just, if there's a hand they want to share in person with one of the Wrecking Crew members, just email me, jim@rec.poker, and say, here's the hand, and pick a member from the Wrecking Crew. And everyone here on the panel, Taylor Moss, John Somsky, Rob Washin, Chris Jones, also Woody Adams, Andrew Feist. I think we've got a couple other excellent members from our panel and beyond who are all interested in working with you. So email me, jim@rec.poker, say, here's the hand or concept I want to discuss. Here's the member of the Wrecking Crew I'd like to talk to about it, and we'll set you guys up for half an hour over Zoom. You guys can go through the action, talk strategy together, and we'll send it out to our premium members. So don't be a stranger. And if you're interested in our Rec Poker forums, go post a hand in there, talk about a concept in there. You get all sorts of great feedback from fun folks, wizards like these, and it's a great place to just learn at your own pace. And if we like your question, you might get it asked on the podcast, might even have you come on and join us. So without further ado, I'd like to thank Taylor Moss, John Somsky, Rob Washam, I'm queuing up the music here, Chris Jones, our Learn Pro Poker website AMP, the Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack and Casino, and Jammin96. Thanks, man. See you next week.